For the last few years, smartphones have begun to get a little boring. And we've basically had the same glass slabs for the last decade. And it's not all manufacturers' fault. I mean, we're complimenting Apple for a design that they brought back from 2014. Great design though, Apple. No, unfortunately, Apple's not going to move it forward. We need a big manufacturer with deep pockets, a big marketing budget, and a lot of influence to bring something new and to move the market forward. Nah. While LG has come up with some very unique designs in recent years, unfortunately they haven't really been sold very well. And so, it's not LG that we need. It's Samsung. See, Samsung has really had the ability to push the industry forward as far as new design. And you could say the very first time they did that was with the Galaxy Note. The original Galaxy Note pushed the industry forward as far as screen size, to an extent that even now we still see the results of it. But this is the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra, and it very well might be the very last Note. Will it leave a good legacy for the Note line? Let's talk about it. This is NOISO, and this is the Note 20 Ultra review. Now, admittedly, I don't have nearly as long of a history with the Note series as a lot of other Note fans. My first Note was the Note 5, and while that was an absolutely incredible phone, it really didn't define the Note series like many of the earlier Notes. When I first picked up the Note 20 Ultra, I didn't have high expectations for the design because I felt that it was quite similar to the Note 10 5G, with the incredibly small edges that are more difficult to grip onto and a little uncomfortable for me. But as I started to use it more and more, there was more of a familiarity where it started to feel more comfortable in my hand because I was so used to it. But the biggest frustration that I had with the design of the Note 20 Ultra is that camera bump. Now, when other reviewers talked about the camera bump, I initially thought it's just a camera bump, it's not going to be a big deal. But this one is incredibly large. Now, I found myself accidentally brushing up against it, accidentally grabbing the phone by the camera bump, and really, unless you have the phone in a relatively thick case, the experience of writing on the Note on a flat surface means that you're going to have a lot of tilt back and forth, which is not a great experience. We'll talk later about the photos that you get out of this layout and whether they're worth the massive camera bump, but from a design standpoint, I can tell you that I am not impressed with the size of this camera bump. Outside of the camera bump, there's nothing really about the Note 20's design that sticks out. The fact is, if you're planning on buying the Note 20 Ultra, you know exactly what you're getting into. A big, bulky monolith of a phone that will likely be more of a two-handed device than a one-handed device. The curved edges, the flat back, and the large footprint means that this isn't the easiest phone to hold in one hand, and frankly, I found myself putting a case on it because it slipped out of my hands a few too many times. I don't usually use a case on my phone, but I did have the extra benefit of having a thick case on the phone to protect it, and I had a case with a kickstand, which means that I could set it up and watch content anywhere. Now let's talk about the display. This display is incredible. Like, obviously all Samsung displays released this year are excellent, but the Note 20 Ultra's size just means that it is more like watching a tablet. I found that it was quite difficult to review tablets while having the Note 20 Ultra, because too often I found that I would just watch content on the Note 20 Ultra rather than getting my tablet, turning it on, and setting it up. The display is even large enough to the point where I'm perfectly comfortable holding it out at arm's length, watching something with someone else, and them being able to see the screen comfortably at the same time as I do. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the curved edges or the hole punch, and I did have a couple accidental touches on the edges of the screen, but not nearly as much as I have had in the past, and the hole punch is small enough on this massive display that it really doesn't get in the way nearly as often as some larger hole punch cutouts. One of the biggest upgrades of the Note 20 Ultra over its predecessors was the addition of the 120Hz display, and frankly, it is so incredibly smooth. It's fast, animations are excellent, and navigating the phone just has the smoothness that prior phones did not. But then I realized for several days using this phone, it was actually in battery saver mode where I was only getting 60 hertz, and I frankly didn't notice the difference. Now, frankly, I've noticed that in the past that I'm not as sensitive to high refresh rate screens as many others, especially other reviewers. So if you are sensitive to them, you will notice the upgrade. But I can say that the performance of the Note 20 Ultra is absolutely incredible and only boosted by the 120 Hz display. Now, obviously the biggest concern of a high refresh rate display is whether you're getting enough battery life. And frankly, I was really impressed with the battery life that I got on this phone, even when I did properly set it to 120 Hz. I typically was getting about 7 to 8 hours of screen on time, and it would last me at least a day and a half, if not 2 days, depending on how much I used it. And that was more than enough, especially in the current environment we're in. Using One UI on the Note 20 Ultra is pretty similar to the experience that you'll get with One UI on most other Samsung phones released this year and last. It's fluid, it's got decent animations, and a relatively muted color palette. Now, I will say that the settings app is probably in need of an upgrade because it still doesn't make a lot of sense to me what lies where, especially with how many settings are on the Note 20 Ultra. And I'm still not the biggest fan of the horizontal app drawer, and I just wish Samsung offered a better solution for people like me who prefer a vertical app drawer. Overall, I'm pretty comfortable and happy with the stock launcher on One UI, and that is a huge improvement from just a couple of years ago where I had to add Nova Launcher to just about every single Samsung phone I used. Of course, the software that differentiates itself on the Note versus other Samsung devices is the software related to the S Pen. And while Samsung does have a pretty robust set of features with the S Pen, as far as like the air gesture experiences, and while I do think of myself as a power user who might get utility out of those very unique experiences, I didn't find that I was able to do so often with the Note 20 Ultra. And at no point in time did I actually find it to be very natural feeling. So for example, I would go to my desk and I would set the Note 20 Ultra down and start listening to music on my Galaxy Buds. And then I had the option of basically taking the S Pen and swiping through the air to fast forward and rewind songs, which in my mind is better than the experience of unlocking the screen or tapping on the screen for fast forward or double tapping on the earbuds. But unfortunately, that would require me actively, when I set down the phone, taking out the S Pen, setting it somewhere else or holding it in my hand, and then when I wanted to fast forward a song, picking up the S Pen and then fast forwarding. And then I would notably have to remember to take the S Pen and put it back into the Note when I got up to leave. So then for me, that leaves the functionality of the S Pen to be simply a pen. And while I do appreciate the increased refresh rate, I didn't really find it was a big difference from my experience of using prior S Pens. And I still have a big problem with the size of the camera bump making it an uneven surface to write on when you put it on a table. And so I found that it rattles back and forth unless you have a relatively big case on it. And then I end up using it just in one hand and writing on it with the other. And while obviously I appreciate the size of it, the curved edges of the display end up reducing the amount of space you have to write on. And I found that quite often I would accidentally run the pen over the edges of the display and end up triggering the back gesture. But then I started to think about what mattered to me on the Note 5 and why I loved the S Pen on that. Not only was it a flat screen, which improved the experience, but I remember setting the Note 5 on my bedside table before bed and then being able to quickly pick it up and write down an idea or remember to text someone in the morning. And that experience added a lot to the Note series for me. And so I consciously started putting the Note 20 series by my bedside before bed rather than leaving it on a charger somewhere else. And I generally got that same experience. There were a couple times where I'd wake up in the night or before going to bed, I'd have a quick idea and I'd be able to jot it down. That to me is what makes the Note series unique. And I wouldn't have that experience on any other normal phone. And then there are the cameras. Over the past few years, Samsung has kind of lost its place as the undisputed camera leader and more often been consistently in the top 3 in terms of camera performance. But the Note 20 Ultra, I was incredibly impressed with the pictures that I got out of this. What was impressive for me was not necessarily just the fact that the pictures coming out of it were good, but they were consistently reliable, and even when I took what would seem to be a boring picture, I was always surprised at how good the picture came out. One of the biggest reasons for this is the size of the sensor on the primary camera. You see, even when I didn't go into live focus portrait mode, I would still get a good natural bokeh effect that would make pictures that would otherwise be boring pop out. Like, for example, when I was taking pictures of these muffins, and there's this natural bokeh effect that makes the picture more appealing. The wide-angle lens on the Note 20 Ultra, while not necessarily as good as the primary sensor, was good enough for me such that it was reliable and it added a lot of versatility when I wanted to take a wider shot. And then there's the telephoto lens. You see, with most 2x or 3x zoom lenses, I don't find that I really rely on them too often because the shot doesn't really lend itself to be a 2x or a 3x zoom. But with the Note 20 Ultra, I started to try and recraft that approach. Since it has a 5x zoom lens, the options that I had for certain pictures really expanded. You see, when I was further away from a subject, I was a lot more confident that I'd be able to take a picture of that subject. A good example is this boat, which was so far off of shore that I didn't expect to really get a striking image with it, but because of the 5x zoom lens, I was able to take a good picture of it, better than my alternatives. And then an even better example is this surfer, which I took a video of. And while this surfer was at least a couple hundred feet offshore, I was still able to get a pretty incredible video out of it with the 5x zoom lens, and I wasn't able to do the same with my iPhone or any other camera I had at the time. My Note 20 Ultra gave me some of the most consistently jaw-dropping images that I got from a phone camera. And while it wasn't necessarily always the best camera in the bunch, it was very, very consistent and very reliable, which is why I wouldn't mind having the Note 20 Ultra as my primary camera phone. So since the Note 20 Ultra is able to take pictures that I wouldn't otherwise be able to take, I might be able to forgive the size of the camera bump. So like many of its predecessors, the Note 20 Ultra checks all of the boxes to be an absolutely incredible phone. And I would even go as far to say this is probably my favorite regular phone of 2020. But this is where it gets interesting. Will the Note 20 Ultra actually leave a good legacy for the Note line? Well, while I do think it is the pinnacle of notes and is absolutely incredible, I don't think the Note 20 Ultra really breaks the mold from other good phones this year. And so as a result, if your idea for the Note line is to differentiate itself, I don't think the Note 20 Ultra really strikes that balance. We'll have to see in the coming months whether Samsung decides to end the Note line. And frankly, if that's the case, it's going to be a sad farewell. But I am incredibly excited with what Samsung is coming up with in terms of foldable phones. And I'll have a video shortly on that. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite Note series phone was, and I'll catch you in the next one.